The way I color grade has changed a lot. When I started, I found it extremely overwhelming and made just about every mistake there was to make. But the way I color grade today involves just 3 simple steps and allows me to correct grade and match any 2 cameras with any 2 images. And the best thing about it is I don't use any LUTs. So let me show you how. I have opened up DaVinci Resolve, I've made a new project, and I have dragged in a load of clips onto a timeline. These clips I've tried keeping as varied as possible. I've got some shot on different cameras from different projects, different lighting, skin tones. These first few are a wedding that was shot on an FX6. So the Sony FX6, there's some strong backlighting with the sun. This one is a music video shot on Ursa Mini, is it? Maybe that's Ursa, is that a Pocket? Maybe that's a Blackmagic Pocket. A video we did for a football kit, a football jersey for American people. So that is just again showing skin tones and lighting. And then this is the fashion project, and lastly a music video. There's all different cameras in here, we'll get into it. But I really want to just kind of mix it up, vary up the most I can, just to show how powerful these simple techniques can actually be. First thing we want to do is you just want to set up the scene. As you can see, none of these images are in log. That's because in DaVinci Resolve, if you come down to the color management tab, and when you first open Resolve, you will see that it's on DaVinci Y RGB. Now, if you just drop this down to color managed, so DaVinci Y RGB color managed, this will automatically grade the images. So you now see that these have gone to LUT-free, these wedding shots and everything else. So it's all in log. We ask it to color manage our timeline, click save, and there it goes, just jumps them into Rec 709. Now, if you're using another software, I'm going to show you in a sec another way around this that comes with the plugin I use that can also get your images to the Rec 709. So once we've got everything in a rough Rec 709, just put a bit of contrast and saturation in all the images. And say, let's say this edit is finished. One's a bit long. Let's say this edit is finished and we want to jump into finalizing it on the color grade. Just one last thing to do on the setup of the project. What I'm doing in Resolve here is I'm coming up to the node graph, and you see there's 2 small dots. If you click on the second one, you'll see that it says timeline to the right. This basically means that anything applied here is applied to the entire timeline. In other softwares, you could use an adjustment layer, or there's probably a similar way to do a timeline grade or layer pretty easily. So I've just created a node, what lets me apply an effect. Then I'm going to search plugins and drop on Dehancer Pro. Now, this plugin is a film emulation plugin. As I mentioned in the intro, it's my favorite plugin. I absolutely adore this. It's great. It really elevated my highlight roll off and just reproduction of colors. I'm not massive on film, I've never shot film. But what I will do is I'll show you in a sec. I researched the film stocks. I actually find it super interesting to research the film stocks and find out which ones were used on what movies and filmed, and I kind of emulate them in here. It can be quite fun, really. It adds another layer. Think of this as like your glue that's just going to bring it all together. It's going to make your edit feel like one piece of work rather than loads of separate different edits. So what I tend to do here is I make 2 separate nodes, and I'll show you why right now. So on the first node, what I will do is I will turn everything off. So I'm just going through all the different sections, make sure everything's just turned off. As you can see, as I disable and enable, nothing's happening. So this plugin right now on this node is doing 0, so doing absolutely nothing. That's just why we want it. Remember a second ago when I said I was going to show you a way if you did not have color space transform in your software? Well, if you have Dehancer Pro, it lets you select the camera you shot on. So if we ask DaVinci to unmanage, let's go back to normal. We'll see we then get the S-Log image. We then say that we want to choose camera, and we then want to choose Sony, and it was a Cineline FX6, and it was showing S-Log S-Gamut 3 Cine 800 ISO. And as you can see now, turning that on and off, that is getting us to the Rec 709 image that I talked around before. So this is a way around that if you're not using Resolve and you want a way to just convert your log image to Rec 709, say. But I don't need to do that myself, so I'm just going to ask Resolve to color manage my footage again. Another tip is if you are using a camera that DaVinci Resolve does not recognize, if it's like an MP4 file on A7S or I'm shooting on the Lumix S5 Mark II here. It would not recognize the MP4s or .movs out of this camera. All you gotta do is come to the thumbnail in Resolve, right click, and it says input color space. This then will bring up all the cameras. So if you was on the FX6, you'll be Sony, S-Gamut, Cine.slog. As I mentioned, if I was shooting on my S5 Mark II, I would go to Panasonic and it'd be V-Gamut Vlog. But that is just how to do it if Resolve does not recognize your footage. Right, so let's finish off this setup. So in the first version of Dehancer on node number 1, what's currently doing nothing, as you can see. I'll turn it on and off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable the film tab. Now what this does is this lets you pick between all the different film stocks that Dehancer Pro and the team have captured and emulated. They've not only emulated it once, like if I pick one of my favorites like Portra 400, you can see that you have a push-pull EV. Now this is imitating how when you develop film, the amount of light that is used in the development process to expose it can produce different results. They've actually taken like 3 different versions of the film stock and how it was developed, and as you move this around, it just slightly changes the contrast and colors and tones of the image. It's just really amazing how much detail in this app they've gone into. It's really impressive. As I mentioned before, because I'm no expert when it comes to film cameras, something I love to do is jump on Google, type in what are the most popular film stocks and for movies, or what are the most popular film stocks people take pictures with, or etc. And I just like to read the descriptions. Some are for bright saturated colors, some create like moodier, colder tones, and that helps me decide which ones I want to test out and try. As there's so many in here, it can be slightly overwhelming. I will pick Kodak Portra 400 as it's just one I tend to use a lot and I'm really familiar with it. And then I would just move the push-pull slider along, staring at my grading monitor here. I'm just looking to see where I like it. I think there's not enough contrast towards the right hand side, so I'll probably just pick somewhere around here. Perfect. Now I will do nothing else on this version of Dehancer. Under the output tab in Dehancer, there is a total impact. As you probably guessed, is kind of like an opacity slider. 100% is obviously like full opacity, and then the more opaque, the more you pull it away and come down. So I tend to flick across my images, looking. As you can see, some of these are off in color, but don't worry about that yet. This is all part of the plan. As I'm flicking through here, I just kind of like to mess around, turning this down and up, seeing where I like it. Let's get around there. Have a look at this one. Turning it off and on as always. So all I've done in this first node is picked a film stock I would like to emulate, and I'm running it around 70% opacity. A lot of people in the film world will tell you that you shouldn't really turn down to like 70% opacity when it comes to film emulation, because when you used to shoot film, it was either 100% or nothing. But this works for me. Sometimes I can find that it's just a little bit too strong for my liking. So I run it down 70. But what I don't like is when you get like 70% bloom or halation, and that leads me on to why I apply all that on a separate node that I would just leave on 100%, and then I know that when there should be halation, there is. So coming on to the second node, we want to just turn everything off again. So under the first tab, you've got the selection where I talked about just picking your camera. You've got the normal color grading stuff that works really well. You've got tint, temperature, exposure, all stuff like that. Moving on to the second one, under each tab you will have to press the enable button to see anything. Like if you see that the enable's unticked and I move it, nothing happens. But as soon as I tick it, you'll see that we start getting a nice contrasting image. This is something I actually like to do at this point. I just knock a bit of contrast in. We're going to be dialing that in a sec. But yeah, we'll also color boost a bit, add a bit of color and contrast in here just so we're closer to our final image. Moving on, you've got the film. We've already dealt with that in the first node. Then you've got film compression. If you ever find yourself with some footage that's got clipped highlights, this is really good for rolling off the highlights. If we just jump onto this shot with the sun in the background and we enable that, you can see that you can really mess with how soft with the highlights roll off. This is like invaluable for clipped highlights. If you ever find yourself needing to try and make something just roll off a bit nicer, I'll definitely add a bit of this on. There's expand, that again is pretty self-explanatory. If you find you want a lower black point, you just wind it up. As you can see, it's crushing the black point. Same again with the white point. If you just look at the graphs in the bottom right corner, see that again, if you find yourself you just want some more crushed blacks, so you want to push the highlights, you can do that in there if you would like. I'm going to leave that off. Under print on the first tab, you can select what type of paper or film it was developed on, your stock was developed on. So I don't really touch this too much. I know that a lot of people say you should match up your film stock to its proper print setting. Like if you can choose one of the theatre ones, you can be on the Kodak 2383, stuff like that. Have a little Google, you can match it up. Personally, I don't dig that deep into it, but it's good that the option's there. And again, it's just impressive on the detail side of things. The colour head is if you want to mess with the colours, but I will be doing none of that at this section. Next is film grain. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory. Originally in film, total black and total white have no detail, so in theory they have no noise. But as you can see, the film, if you are someone who wants a film grain a project, that's the style you're going for. The ones in here are the best I've ever used. This is one of the only plugins I see go up to 65mm film grain. Normally you max out 35mm. But it's really good to show. You can pick a corresponding millimeter type film with an ISO range of that film stock. So if you want a 8mm 500 ISO, there you go. If you want to go for some effect like that, you can just now, without barely touching anything, you can really see how genuine it looks. Now my favorite two parts of this plugin are the bloom and halation. Now in film, bloom and halation normally happen together. They're really common together, so I put them both on. I don't touch them, I don't change any settings, I just select them both and move on. But as you can see, turn on and on, that's having a massive effect on our footage. I'll move over to a different one. It's really, honestly, I can't praise the bloom in this plugin enough. Film damage is exactly as it sounds. It enables like scratches, hairs, dust that was on the film reel. You can either go into custom to adjust manually, or you can just pick one of the things. As you can see, the lower the millimeter, the more prominent it will be, basically. But again, I'll be leaving that off. Film breath. Film breath is something that happens in between the frames. It was like a slight change in color or like contrast, like the grade slightly changes in between. You really need smooth playback for this, so make sure that you're doing like render catch or proxies or whatever if you can't get smooth playback. I will leave this off. Gate weave, again, is something that happens in between the frames as the film reel was getting pulled in between or something. Again, I'm no expert on film, but again, I'll leave this off, but it is kind of paramount that you have smooth playback to notice this effect. I'll be leaving it off. Vignette is exactly as we all know, the classic vignette. That will just add a nice vignette to your footage. I'll be leaving that off. A monitor, this is really cool as a built-in false color. If you're wanting to see exposure, see what's underexposed, overexposed, it's always nice to have this if your software don't have one built in. And one of my favorite things about this is clipping indicator. Now, I just kind of leave this on sometimes to show where my grades are clipping. As you can see, it's showing on this image that in the bottom left and right corner, the shadows clipping into black. See on this, again, it does the same with the highlights. There you go. As you can see, it starts to show you that it's clipping. As you can see there, I'm breaking this image on purpose, but you can see it clips on the highlights as well as the shadows. That's just nice to leave on. I absolutely love this plugin. I don't get paid to say any nice things about it. Use it on all my paid work. I have managed to get us a promo code that is OBP10. If you head to the link in the description, they do offer a free trial, and it works in all the softwares. They even have an iOS app for iPad and iPhone that I've not personally used. Go grab the free trial, test it out. If you like it and you decide that you want to purchase it, use code OBP10 and that will get you a 10% discount, as I think it's the best plugin on the market today for color grading. So that is a project fully set up now. This is how I set up most of my projects. One of the biggest mistakes I used to make, and I see a lot of beginners making, is by doing their look last. If you've gone through each individual piece of footage and clip on your timeline, matching up, getting everything like the exposure right, the tints right, and then you go back through and add a look again at the very end, you could be undoing all the hard work that you have done. So I like to apply all my looks and film emulations right out the gate, convert it to Rec 709, get some contrast and saturation there, then apply your look, dial that in. As we go through the 3 simple steps that I use, we will see that we match up, we get everything looking nice, and there is no look at the end going to break and undo all the hard work we have put in. What I'm going to do next is create 3 simple nodes for each step of the color grading process. I'll just hit the button here on my controller. I'll quickly name these. The first one is going to be exposure and ratio, so the contrasts. The next one is going to be color, just for colors and casts. And the very last one is going to be secondaries. Now these are the only 3 steps you will need. I know you've watched many color grading tutorials out there that have told you need to pick out skin tones and correct and push, and I know you've probably seen a Hollywood movie where they do it, but I promise you for most of your projects these will get you 99% of the way to the look you need. So first thing I will do now is I will select all the rest of my footage in the timeline and I will just copy across, flicking through. Every single clip has the same lineup and setup. Step number 1 is contrast and exposure and brightness. So the first thing you want to do is just come across to your wheels. We're not going to touch the lift gamma gain, not yet. The first thing I've always just using the offset, what will take the overall brightness of the image, and we just want to go up and down. The scope I like to use for this one is just a waveform. I will just make it really simple. I'll take the colors off it and I'll just staring at the waveform, staring at my image. You can see that the enhancer's bringing in the clipping levels for us. Make sure we're not clipping anything. Just make sure that you go too bright and too dark, because your eyes need to understand where the midpointer is. So if you can compare what's too bright and too dark, and then you'll find your perfect mid-ground. Right there, you can see I barely touched that. Next step, you've guessed it, is contrast. I will simply just use the contrast slider and the pivot slider. And again, same theory, just getting the contrast. I'm doing it on my control surface here. Just twist the contrast, pushing it up way too much, destroy your image. Then just move across to your pivot. We're just pivoting back and forth, finding where the best pivot point is. Let me just bring that down a bit. Finding where it looks nice on the pivot. Then reset the contrast back to 0. And then just dial in the contrast you think looks good. I'll just tweak it a bit, undoing that off and on. All we've done there is we've slightly made the image pop a little bit. I love the analogy of like we are smoothing it out. It's all about passes. Like you're never going to nail it on the first time round. It's like you're sanding down a piece of wood. You just need to go over and over it again. So don't spend too much time. One of the biggest mistakes I used to make was when I got stuck grading a clip, I would just spend ages on that one clip. And normally after 2 or 3 passes on it, I would have it perfect. So the best thing you can do is just quickly address it and move on and come back to it, as your eyes were going to be fresh and you might be able to see something you couldn't originally see when you first come around to the clip. So what I'll do now is I won't move on to color just yet. And it sounds strange, but I will jump across to the next clip. And again, first thing we want to do is just jump on the offset wheel. We're moving it up, down. That's too dark, too bright. I'm gonna see the part where the sun goes behind. Dress that a little bit. I don't mind if they're clipping a tad. We'll lift them in a sec. Going back. Again, now we're gonna dive into the contrast. Pivoting around, I can see it's like picking loads of noise up I don't like at the bottom there. So I just push them back down. But I want some detail at the lower section of this image. Reset the contrast and dial back in. Just to where I like it. Now this is where sometimes I'll jump into the lift and game. I don't really touch the gamma, try and stay away from the gamma. So right now I might just adjust the lift a little bit, just to see if I like anything, going backwards and forth on it. Same with the highlights. I'm happy with that. I'm just going to move on, not spend too much time on it. So I've gone all the way through every clip, just doing some contrast and exposure. We have the enhancer over all the clips, just gelling them together a little bit. So step number 2 is going to be color. And again, for this one, sticking to the same theory of using the largest brush, we will just jump back over to the offset wheel. So that's this one right here. We won't be using the pushing any colors into shadows or highlights or any of that stuff that you might think is really cool. It's just unnecessary at this point. So I pull up the Vex scope. I like to turn on the skin tone indicator line that's just here. I like to turn on 2x just to show me a bigger zoomed in version of what's going on. And just using the offset wheel, that's this one right here, I will just push in the direction, looking at the vector scope, seeing that we've got more of the image down towards greeny blues and cyans. So I'll just push in the opposite direction, looking for that like color contrast, the center of the image. I'm just, so once I've kind of got the center on the warmth and the coolness of the image, I tend to kind of lean towards green and magenta for the tint. So again, I'm just kind of 2 magenta, 2 green, showing my eyes what's too much of each one, using that skin tone line just to balance it up. And back and forth now, you can see we've removed a massive green cyan tint. Dial it back a little bit, jumping across, next clip, onto the color node. Again, just using the one offset wheel. I'm going to push and pull. This one doesn't seem to have anything too crazy going on. Feels nice when you warm that sun up a little bit. Dial it to green, dial it to magenta, and find the middle. And we're there, undoing that, off and on. It's a little bit warm, but I kind of like it. So as you can see on the bottom of the waveform, you've got like really squished blacks. I'm just going to use the lift wheel here to just pick that up a little bit, reduce some of the contrast. A little tip here, if you want more detail in your shadows, lift them too high, then come across this little wheel that says log. Come across the log here. And on the shadows one, because this is going to grab just the bottom of it, just pull down on that and let it like crush the bottom, but not the detail. Right, so the final step that I normally do is secondaries. Extras is another thing. You could call it extras if you want. I just kind of look at the image and think what's wrong with it. Like for me on this one, the white building behind them is really bright, but you can maybe use a window. Another tip I have when using windows, make them absolutely as big as possible and just with loads of kind of gradient softness off the edges. See, subtle enough, it's got enough fade on it. Now if you undo that with the original image, the Rec 709 one, so not the log one, it now feels really flat and lifeless. As you can see, we've brought the thing to life. You can just keep tweaking. I think the lower contrast coming from the sun is making the shadow sort of noise on this one. Another tip is always do your noise reduction first to like your log image or as early as possible. So I'll just add a node here before. I'm going to dial in about 15%, 18% maybe, just to touch up the image a little bit. And that just helps you be a little bit cleaner, get rid of some of that noise that exists. Here's a better example of the face refinement tool. Again, if I jump in here, click analyze. She's done an excellent job. Zooming in, can sharpen them up. You can just see it brings the sharpness through. I won't go too heavy on that. Brighten them, and then push the highlight a tad. I don't mess with any of the other features too much in here. But as you can see, like now his eyes are really popping. The shot's starting to look really nice. We've got a before, we've got an after. I will just pass through one more time, checking colors and contrast and any little weird artifacts, or maybe just push up the mid-tones on there, maybe the shadows, it's a little bit contrasty for me, like that. You know, just decide what you're going to do. That is that a little bit bright. I will jump back into the offset. I will just take a bit of exposure off that. Not much. Look at this one. I might think, the skin tones are a little off. Just maybe push into green and back to magenta. Just tweaking. Land there maybe. Another thing you might want to do on this one is just jump across to the curves. In Resolve, it shows you where the spikes, the colors are behind the hue rectangle here. So you just grab the greens, push them up, saturation to them, cyans. Be careful with the reds, obviously she's got red hair, and also there's a lot of that in her skin pigment. You can push them a tad, just kind of pushing the saturation in certain locations. The magenta pink, I can have some as well. I've really tried simplifying the way I color grade projects. At one point I was just trying to force in every fancy tool, and with all these new releases coming out in the new Adobe software and Final Cut and Resolve, giving me all these amazing features, I was just finding a reason to use them when I never needed to. So the main takeaway from this would be, for me, is the fastest point from A to B is normally also the best result. I believe that the results will speak for themselves if you just take on this mindset of keeping it really simple and narrow it down to the 3 steps with an overall look as like a glue. If you want to find out what I'm up to when I'm not here color grading, click here.